It was a chaotic rush hour scene at the metro station, with crowds of people rushing to catch their trains. My family and I were swept up in the sea of commuters, struggling to make our way through the packed platform. The trains were arriving and departing with lightning speed, each one bursting at the seams with passengers. We had to let several trains pass before we could even attempt to squeeze on board. I was relieved when I finally managed to find a seat on the train, exhausted from the chaos. I was only 12 years old at the time, and my shy nature made me dread confrontation. I just wanted to blend into the background and avoid any attention. I made sure to sit in a regular seat, not one of the priority seats designated for pregnant women, disabled individuals, or the elderly. I thought I had found a safe haven. But little did I know, my peace was short-lived. Just as I was starting to relax, a trio of women, all around their 60s, caught my attention. They seemed to be the self-appointed queens of the train, with Karen as their leader. She was a master of subtle hostility, whispering to her minions while casting disgusted glances my way. Her hands shielded her mouth, but her exaggerated expressions and pointed stares made it obvious I was the topic of their hushed conversation. I felt a surge of anxiety, my shy nature making me want to avoid conflict at all costs. Assuming she wanted my seat, I offered it up, hoping to diffuse any tension. But instead of gratitude, Karen turned her back on me, her silence more unsettling than any confrontation. Her minions followed suit, and the three of them stood there, radiating disapproval. I shrunk back into my seat, trying to mind my own business and avoid any further interaction. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The whispering continued, with Karen's voice growing louder and more animated. Her minions seemed to be egging her on, their eyes fixed on me with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Then, without warning, Karen turned on me, her face red with indignation. She began yelling, her voice piercing the din of the train. "You didn't offer me your seat," she bellowed, as if I had committed a heinous crime. "I'm old, you're young, you stand, I sit," she spat, her words dripping with venom. I tried to explain, to tell her that I had offered my seat just minutes before. But she wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise. She cut me off, her voice rising to a demonic screech. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and frustration, unable to defend myself against her tirade. The other passengers began to stare, drawn in by the commotion. I shrank back in my seat, hoping the storm would pass, but Karen seemed determined to make me her personal target. Throughout Karen's rant, her loyal sidekick, Minion 1, stood behind her, arms crossed and a smug expression on her face. She seemed to be reveling in the drama, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and malice. It was like she had stepped straight out of a Netflix movie, playing the role of the mean popular girl's trusty sidekick. Minion 2, on the other hand, looked slightly more subdued, her eyes darting around the train car with a hint of embarrassment. But despite her apparent discomfort, she didn't speak up or try to intervene, seemingly content to let Karen continue her tirade. I, on the other hand, was desperate to defuse the situation. I offered my seat to Karen again, hoping to appease her, but she was having none of it. She huffed and puffed, her chest heaving with indignation, and raised her head to deliver a disdainful no. Her response was dripping with condescension, as if I was beneath her. I felt a surge of frustration and humiliation, wondering why she was being so unreasonable. After her dramatic rejection of my offered seat, Karen continued to rant and rave, her voice showing no signs of fatigue. She launched into a tirade about the supposed disrespect of young people towards their elders, her words dripping with venom and self-righteousness. I sat there, petrified, feeling like I was under attack by a stranger. My mind went blank, and I couldn't think of a way to defend myself or escape the situation. I was scared, and my eyes darted around the train car, searching for an escape or a savior. That's when a man sitting a few seats down, who had been watching the exchange with growing annoyance, finally intervened. "Shut up and leave him alone," he barked, his voice firm and authoritative. Karen's eyes flashed with anger, but she seemed to realize she was outnumbered. With a huff, she reluctantly got up and walked away. Still muttering to herself, I breathed a sigh of relief as the train car fell silent once more. I was still shaken, but I couldn't help feeling grateful to the stranger who had saved me from Karen's wrath. Even to this day, I remember his kindness and intervention with gratitude. It still baffles me to this day that Karen chose to target me, a 12-year-old kid, sitting in a regular seat, when there were plenty of other people sitting down, including some in priority seats. If she genuinely needed to sit, a simple request to someone in a priority seat would have sufficed. She could have politely asked them to give up their seat, and if they needed it, she could have asked someone else. But no, she deliberately chose to confront me, a child, who had already offered my seat to her. It's mind-boggling. Moreover, Karen didn't appear to be elderly or frail enough to warrant special consideration. She seemed perfectly capable of standing. And yet she chose to make a scene and berate me instead of exploring more reasonable options. Her behavior was not only unreasonable, but also revealing of her true nature. She wasn't interested in finding a solution. She was interested in asserting her dominance and bullying someone into submission. And that someone just happened to be a vulnerable 12-year-old. And that's the story of my encounter with the infamous Karen. Gotta love entitled Karens, right? They make life so much more interesting. Edit, I've had a few people ask where my parents were during this ordeal. I should have mentioned earlier that I had split up from them when I went to find a seat. The train was incredibly packed, making it difficult for them to make their way over to me. But honestly, I was used to being alone on public transport at that age. My parents had taught me to be independent and confident in navigating public spaces, so being alone didn't faze me. Still, it would have been nice to have them there to handle Karen's wrath.
Story 2.
I was enjoying a quiet evening at home when my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, knocked on the door. He was a friendly guy, but I had no idea what he wanted. As I opened the door, he asked about the new security cameras I had installed around my house. I proudly showed him the cameras, thinking he was interested in getting some for himself. I had recently purchased the cameras after seeing how effective they were at my aunt's house. She had caught a few suspicious characters lurking around her property, and the cameras had helped identify them. I wanted that same peace of mind for my own home. The cameras were positioned to capture views around my house, providing an added layer of security. As I showed Mr. Johnson the cameras, he asked about the features. I explained the high-resolution video, night vision, and motion detection. He seemed impressed, but then he asked if I could reposition the cameras to include his house in the view. I thought he was joking, but his serious expression told me otherwise. I laughed, thinking he was pulling my leg, but Mr. Johnson was dead serious. He explained that we should do the neighborly thing and watch each other's backs. He even asked for access to the footage, suggesting we could both benefit from the added security. I was taken aback by his audacity. I politely told him no, suggesting he should get his own cameras. But Mr. Johnson became agitated, claiming I was being selfish and unwilling to help. He threatened to contact the HOA if I didn't comply with his request. I stood firm, knowing I had done nothing wrong. I decided to reach out to the HOA to get their take on the situation. They responded promptly, stating that I hadn't broken any rules and had the right to install cameras on my property. They did remind me to minimize the view of neighboring properties, which I had already done. The aftermath of the situation was surprising. Another neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, texted me that Mr. Johnson had quit our neighborhood watch program. He claimed that neighbors weren't looking out for each other and would only focus on his own property from now on. It was a childish reaction, but I was relieved to have stood up for my rights. As the days went by, I noticed Mr. Johnson was avoiding me. He wouldn't wave or say hello when I saw him outside. I tried to brush it off, but it was awkward. I wondered if he had really expected me to compromise my own security for his benefit. One evening, I saw him installing his own security cameras. I smiled, thinking he had finally taken my advice. But then I noticed the cameras were pointed directly at my house. I felt a surge of anger and realized he was trying to intimidate me. I decided to take action and contacted the AAA again. They reminded Mr. Johnson that he needed to follow the same rules as everyone else and adjust his cameras to respect neighboring properties. He grudgingly complied, but the tension between us remained. The situation had taught me a valuable lesson. Standing up for my rights was essential, even if it meant ruffling a few feathers. I was proud of myself for not giving in to Mr. Johnson's demands, and I knew my security cameras would continue to provide me with peace of mind.